welcome everybody to Wide Awake Original Man. And on this channel, what we do is we explore topics of the extraordinary phenomenon. We talk about things that have to do with dreams, things that have to do with meaning, of spiritual things. We also speak about, we have many videos about Sunflower Lotus and her being visited by baby planes and ships of lights in Merkaba. We also speak about relationships. I mean, Wide Awake Original Man is dedicated to these topics that really affect human interpersonal relationships and changing of cycles in the times and change that we live in. For, man, any living creature can see that we are in, that times are changing. And our study of the Mayan calendar, our study of animal totem, our understanding of dreams, our understanding of symbols, the way the mind works, the way relationships work, these are all changes. For when human beings begin to change and become impacted by things that are happening around us, things that are happening inside of us, these are signs that things are changing. Now, this particular video, I'm doing this video because over the last year or so, I've been making some interesting discoveries concerning the timing of Mr. Samuels' passing away, his rise to fame, and then his sudden impact that he had on black women, on black male-female relationships, his image, his demeanor, his ability to take something that was so unpolished and put it in a way that made it now the in vogue thing to be speaking about, trending topics. So this video is a focus on what this man was known for. Buy a dog, die alone. And we're gonna analyze, what is the meaning of the dog? What is the meaning of Mr. Samuels' life? What is the timing of his becoming viral? And we're also gonna look at his sudden death and what it means for the future of relationships between black people and the future of our existence in this country. The first thing I want you to understand, for those of you who know me for my understanding of the mind for my Facebook reels, I want you to understand something. Mr. Samuels' birthday is March 13th, 1965. Now, Mr. Samuels became very, very popular during this pandemic. Now, what I think is so fascinating is that the day the United States declared an emergency, again, we're talking about this North American calendar, the Mayan or Aztec calendar. This country went into shutdown, emergency, March 13th, which happens to be the same day that Mr. Samuels turned 54. Now, March 13th is also the day that Bill Gates stepped down as CEO of Microsoft. It's also the same day that Breonna Taylor was shot. So here's three coinciding things. Mr. Samuels, the federal emergency of a virus, which is a definite federal emergency, which the United States is in a state of emergency now. The resigning of a man who is definitely top 1% kind of man, what they would call this high value man. And then the murder of a black woman. All of these three things coincide with the birth of Mr. Samuels. 1965 to 2020 that was his 54th birthday. Now, who knew that in this same year that Mr. Samuels was going to go viral during the time of a pandemic. Everybody's sitting down. Everybody's shocked. Everybody's in the house. Everybody's on their phones. We're definitely walking through times of change. Now, what I want to point out is the day the United States went into federal emergency and into pandemic mode was what's during called the vulture cycle. The vulture cycle. What's also interesting is the day Mr. Samuels dies is during what's called the vulture cycle. Now, why is this important? Timing is everything. Of course, these things are taking place in the United States. So it makes sense to look at the calendar that is indigenous to this part of the earth to begin to bring some light to this interesting coincidence of why these things happened with Mr. Samuels' birth and his eventual going viral during this pandemic. Now, according to the Mayan calendar, these totems, this totem of the vulture represents janitor-like energy. It represents the energy of the vulture to come clean up the thing that is taking place between predator and prey. The vulture is wise in that he flies above the duality of predator and prey, lets the chips fall where they may, and he swoops down, taking advantage of what takes place. When Mr. Samuels is declared officially passed on, it is during the vulture cycle, the 7th day of the vulture cycle. And that actually happened to coincide with the day I was born, January 20th, 1981, was the 7 wind. And this is the day that Mr. Samuels was taken. This happened to coincide on the day that, which is my Mayan birthday. So I think it only makes sense that for somebody who is so invested intellectually, spiritually, information-wise in this calendar, and as somebody who is in America, and somebody who did watch Mr. Samuels, who as a person I was somewhat fascinated and interested in material, learned a lot from him, it only makes sense that if the man was taken on my Mayan birthday, which coincided with May 5th, 2022, it makes sense to me that I may have this interesting perspective to offer about what this man's rise to fame meant, what his materials represent, and the future of what's coming. So let's talk as we continue about this vulture-like energy. You see, Mr. Samuels was like this vulture. He was like this vulture who swoops down and gives this energy, because we have to keep in mind that the vulture is a Christ figure, similar to a Christ figure. It is this vulture represents a savior energy. Now you may think, well, why would a vulture represent savior energy? Well, because of the mechanics on which the vulture operates on when someone is dying. Then that vulture comes to clean it up. So in a sense, he is this figure, the vulture is a resurrection type energy. And it is based in death. Because resurrection means to bring up from death, to resurge. And have you ever seen a man in the manosphere, the black manosphere, in so many words, polish, resurrect a conversation between black men and black women? This literally hasn't happened for a while, where now people are speaking about black male-female relationships, many times using his talking points, which are general talking points in the black manosphere. Now, let's continue further. So we understand that this vulture is a Christ-like energy, a resurrection type energy. And during this 13-day cycle of the vulture cycle, bad habits are rooted out. Things that discontinue, failures are addressed. And so what did Mr. Samuels become viral for? Not necessarily for what he spoke to men about, but what he spoke to women about. And what we discover is that a lot of the failures in black relationships were initiated by black women. So, of course, this vulture energy, you can go to azteccalendar.com and research the vulture image, the totem, and it will show you. It represents facing these issues that cause things to fail, past failures. People born during this time are very good at showing up at places right when something dangerous is about to happen. Sometimes I'll show up to places right when something is about to happen so that possibly I can prevent it from happening. Or if something happened, if something is lost or something is missing or something is going on with someone, I always seem to have this timing where I'll go right next to the person who's the responsible party. Because of this vulture-like energy that I was born with. So his birthday coinciding with the federal emergency of the United States, when the pandemic was declared an emergency during Trump's presidency, and his birthday coinciding during this cycle that's called the vulture cycle. And now it's this same cycle that Mr. Samuels exits the stage, the vulture cycle, May 5th, 2022. Now, you look at the thumbnail, the title is, we're talking about this dog that he spoke about. Buy a dog, die alone. Buy a dog, die alone. Buy a dog, die alone. And then the trumpets being played. This is what I want you to understand about a funeral. You see, when he was focusing on this dog, he was basically looking at the culture of white women and white men and their fascination with dogs. Many times when you'll see white women, many times on their profiles, their dating profiles, you'll see just white people in general with pictures of dogs. Well, we're talking about a relationship that whites have developed with dogs. But it also bears witness to why is it that dog becomes the mate of a woman, particularly in her time of solitude. Now, this was something that black women are starting to do. Of course, people have had dogs many times, but what I'm speaking about is the culture of death, the culture of what the dog represents. Now, in the Mayan calendar, as it is in other original calendars, the dog represents funeral rites. It represents passing on to the next side. It represents this animal that guides the past soul into the next life. This dog also represents law and authority. Law and authority. And it represents breaking barriers. Boundaries being broken. Why? Because death is the quintessential barrier breaker. And this is what he became known for. Buy a dog, die alone. Now, this dog representing death, law and authority. This dog representing funerals. Of course, this was a theme that kind of ended Mr. Samuels' life. But I also want you to understand this, that this same dog representing law and authority also was calling on the reality that Mr. Samuels became the law and authority on correcting black male-female relationships, particularly black women. This is something that you must understand, that when a man is tied to this dog, he becomes an authority. You'll notice, you'll see the authorities with those dogs. They don't use parrots. They don't use cats. They use the dog. Why? Because of the intelligence of the dog. Because of the heightened sense of the dog. And why is the dog related to death and those who have passed on? Is because dogs are known to see things that you cannot see. And it is known in certain religious circles that those who have passed on in the way of God are not dead. You just can't see them, because they exist on the same realm that we live on. You just can't see them. So here's Mr. Samuels being made an authority and becoming a lawgiver about renewed black relations, the resurrection of black relationships. You know what's also fascinating? We know that Mr. Samuels was a man who was in the ministry, several ministries, several singles ministries. So of course this man from his college days had an interest in understanding black male-female relationships. So I think it's so fascinating that this man was a Bible man. Did you know that in the book of Isaiah, 3rd chapter, 13th verse, 3:13, it says this, that the Lord takes his place to judge, and he begins to offer or issue judgment on three peoples. The third chapter of Isaiah is dedicated to what God is going to do in terms of judgment to those parts of our society that are causing so much stress. And he brings up so many realities in chapter 3. One of these realities he brings up is those of pastors, elders, and princes of his people who rob the poor of their wealthy. He also speaks about the fact that women rule over his men, over the men of his tribe. That God's people, how you can tell that God's people are his people, are a special people, because his people are the only people where women are being ruling over his people. And in the 13th chapter, God enters in as a judge. He enters in the book of Isaiah, chapter 3, verse 13. He enters into the discussion as a judge, as someone who comes to call things out and to call it like it is. And keep in mind that during this same 3rd chapter, famine is being threatened. Lack is being threatened. Things being taken away is being threatened. Poverty, end times. You can agree that we're definitely in the end times, and you can definitely agree that Mr. Samuels rose during the time of the end. Why do you know? Because of the pandemic hit. Oh, everything stopped moving. That means things ain't moving around. War is happening. Man, this chapter is about a chapter of war. Police roll with the dog. They use the dog because it helps them with their authority, their abilities to enforce the law. And just like Mr. Samuels, see, Mr. Samuels signaled that type of man who, like a dog, who was a very well-trained dog, who was able to sniff out the bull, sniff out the contraband, be an attack on those things that are not good. This can only be done by a masterful God. Now, I know all this to you may sound weird, but I'm offering you my perspective. What I want you to do is I want you to listen to this, and I want you to leave a comment. I want you to like and subscribe to the channel, because I intend to go more in detail as it relates to the symbol of the dog, and as it relates to some of the conversations he was having concerning these black male-female relationships, mainly being Will and Jada Pinkett Smith. And this woman representing a woman, because the dog figured greatly with Jada Pinkett Smith. Why? Because Jada Pinkett Smith was born on a dog day. According to the Mayan calendar, she was born on the first day. And I'll show this to you. See, and Jada Pinkett Smith, just like the dog, represented the connection of death. Her fascination with the dead man, Tupac. And Jada Pinkett Smith is the quintessential woman, as we see in her relationship with Will Smith, that she was ruling over that man. And this is a sign that she is what the Bible calls the daughter of Zion, because they rule over the men of God. This is the backwards relationship that must be fixed, and Mr. Samuels signaled that the end of this madness is right at your door.